Okay, I'm going to call this Plan Commission meeting for August 12th to order. Roll call, please.
Chris Zellner.
Here.
Joe Zitzelberger.
Here.
Brad Zeman.
Here.
Brian Malish.
Here.
Chris Thomas.
Here.
Brian Wallace.
Here.
Okay, first item on the agenda is minutes. Anybody need anything changed or look for approval?
Move to approve the minutes.
Motion by Joe Zitzelberger,
Second.
second by Brad Zeman. Any other comments? Call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Any public comments not on the agenda this evening? Is this part of this right now, or?
That would
Or are we doing
pertain
Or is it
to
pertaining to?
new business 2.
Okay, we'll leave that there then. Anybody else that wants to make any comments? For any items not on the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on. Okay, so our village attorney is going to be needing to leave a little earlier tonight, so we're reordering the agenda just a little bit. So we're going to take number 2 on the public hearing and move that up to right now, and then we'll go back to the regular schedule. Everybody okay with that? Yes?
Fine.
Okay, so first item we have is public hearing and discussion action on proposed changes to the village zoning code of ordinance related to signs.
Quick introduction, then Brian's gonna talk through it a little bit more. Based on the last plan commission meeting, we looked at this at a staff level, and we sensed there wasn't a lot of consensus on what the changes were for the zoning code. So we really focused in on one particular issue that we received complaints on and complying with the Supreme Court case. So really focused in on political signs and complying with what's in the state statute. So I'm gonna let Brian walk you through the proposed changes, but they're pretty limited in scope.
Yeah, the changes that we're making to our code are essentially to ensure that our sign code is consistent with what state statutes are when it comes to political messaging and really related to campaigns. And so the changes, we currently have in our code a definition for a political sign. And in light of the changes that we're making here to make sure that we're in compliance with the state statutes, if you look at your packet, page 86, the first change is what we're doing is we're taking out the definition of political sign. And then what we're doing is we already have in our code a definition of temporary sign. And we're modifying that definition in 2 ways. First, we're taking out the reference to political signs within the definition of temporary sign. Then we're adding a sentence that says temporary signs shall not exceed 11 square feet in area. That language is actually already in our code in a different spot, and so we're leaving that language in the other spot, but we felt like it would be appropriate since we're already changing the definition of the temporary sign. Let's make it, let's state that language here also within the definition section. It also relates to the campaign sign, the political messaging sign. And so essentially what we've done on page 87 of your packet, and when you look at section 3 of the ordinance, is there's a couple of different ways that you can essentially incorporate state statutes. You can either go through and make a whole bunch of changes to your code, or you can do what we're proposing to do here and add language that's saying, look, we're adopting and incorporating by reference section 12.04 of the state statutes that deals with signage for political messaging, and we're going to incorporate that into our code. And then we do that in subparagraph 1 of what's been drafted and what's on the board up there. Subparagraph 2, this is by state statutes, the different, state statutes give us the ability to regulate political messaging in very limited ways. And that's what we're doing here in subparagraph 2. So with certain exceptions, they can't exceed 11 square feet in area. That also happens to tie in with our temporary signing. Again, I want to be clear, though, these political messaging signs related to campaign periods are not temporary signs. They're going to be able to be out there based on the period of time that is permitted under the state statutes. But I have to believe there has to be some type of connection where we had a certain limitation on the size of our temporary signs, and it's the exact limitation on the political messaging signs. So I think that there is probably some correlation there. We don't allow signs in the road right-of-way, and that's one of the things that we can prohibit for political messaging, and so we have that in here. And to the extent that you have a political messaging sign that has electrical, mechanical, or other issues of that nature associated with it, then as a municipality, you are able to apply your code provisions there. But again, very limited. I mean, and then the last section of the ordinance is just we have a number of different spots where we have continued references to political signs, since we're taking that definition out of our sign code and effectively replacing it with the state statutes. You necessarily want to take it out, each time that it's referenced within the sign code. But big picture, we're modifying our code to be consistent with state statutes as it pertains to elections and campaigns. And I think, as Kevin noted, that's the one area where we had received some complaints in the past. And so we felt like we wanted to make that change now. You guys had a really good discussion at the last meeting, or maybe 2 meetings ago, and everybody, I think, made very reasonable points, and there wasn't a consensus. And so I think on those things, we probably need to make a determination as to whether or not we really need to change the code on that. This was the more pressing issue, we felt.
Okay, then I'm going to open up the public hearing. For anybody, there's no papers. Is there anybody who would like to address the board on this issue? Or commission, I should say. Okay, hearing none, then we'll move on. I'll close the public hearing. I think you've accomplished what we needed to accomplish within this. A little uncomfortable with you stating that we're going to just leave the others alone for this time being.
Well, we're leaving it alone in the sense that we're not modifying our code. In other words, we're going to continue to apply the code that we have and continue to apply the practice that we have. I don't want to reiterate everything that we have this United States Supreme Court decision out there. We all have to live by it. Not every municipality has run out and changed its code, though. I think the goal is to try to work with people and make sure that we apply our code, and if somebody comes up to us and says, we think your code is inconsistent with this U.S. Supreme Court decision, we're going to have to address that. And quite frankly, I don't want to step on Kevin's toes here, but it may be a decision by the village board to say, you know what, we might need to invest some money. And I know there are communities that are, as part of the rewriting of their zoning code, are rewriting their sign code. Now, I don't think the village needs to go that far, but the village board at some point may make a decision to say, you know what, we need our sign code rewritten. Well, that's a budget issue because of the cost that's associated with it. I think our thought process here was, we know that we did have one problem, and we had one problem that we could clearly fix through this change, and that's why we went forward with it, especially in light of the good discussion that you had at the last meeting.
Adding on to that, I think Jason could touch on the fact that this is a pretty active discussion among planners around the United States, and in particular in Wisconsin. And there is no good model out there in terms of what your sign code should look like, because it's still in a state of flux. And until communities, continually there be some challenges, and communities continue to work through, what's allowed and what's not allowed. Is every time we start to look at this, we get caught up in this loop. Is it, you got to read the sign or not read the sign? And we're getting stuck every time we start to interpret this. And it's we suspect, and Jason can talk about this, it's going to be a number of years before we have some good model ordinances that we can look to and that we can incorporate.
There are ordinances that have been held out as models, and each one that we've looked at has its own flaws. The most consistent thing that we're hearing across the profession is be reasonable, communicate well in the enforcement of your sign code, with the objective of working with people and not landing in court.
Commission members, questions, comments?
Well, I'll second Kevin's conversation there, and it's a tough one. And it also comes down to the enforcement of it. So who is the enforcer? Is anybody truly out there enforcing it on a regular basis? That's up to the village, but very sensitive issue, and everyone's going to have a little different opinion, but pretty straightforward changes. I like what I see.
Anyone else? Well, I'll just ask the question, because you just kind of opened up a Pandora's box in my world when how you stated that, which was, we'll just wait and see, but we have to be negotiable, yet not end up in court. Where does that line?
Well, I think
there's no line there. It's just open for debate. Makes it like we're not able to do anything at that point, because who wouldn't sue us at that point?
Well, we haven't. This case was decided, I think maybe 2017.
50.
2015. We haven't, people aren't, I don't want you to give the opinion that people are walking out there trying, saying, all right, we're going to catch you on the sign code issue and we're going to sue you. Because one of the things that we have the ability to do is, if somebody actually does raise what is a legitimate issue, we have the ability on a, and it may not be, it may not be the ideal approach, but I can tell you that it is approach that municipalities use of, okay, if we don't have a global fix to something, and I think that's one of the problems here is you can go out and spend a lot of money and change your code, and it still might not be in compliance. In which case, then you've spent a lot of money, time, and effort. You've had a lot of meetings. You can still get sued. Here we knew this is an issue that we knew that we had to address. I think that we've addressed it in this ordinance. In a perfect world, would we have a more comprehensive change and be able to come to you and say, we're suggesting these changes, and by making these changes, we know that we're going to be in compliance with this U.S. Supreme Court opinion? We'd much rather be in a position to tell you that right now. For all the research that we've done, we wouldn't be able to say that to you. And so I don't necessarily think that we're in a worse position because there isn't the fix. And so even if we came to you, we'd still be in the same boat we are now. We know this is something that we can fix. And so, that's ultimately why it's been narrowed in that fashion.
I would add that what you don't have in your code is a clearly different standard for different sign types by area. So it would be a big red flag if you said, all right, political signs you can have X square feet, rummage sale signs you can have Y square feet, and a bunch of different standards. That is problematic, and that really gets to the heart of what the case was about, is different treatment based on content. And so we're trying to work some of there isn't much of that in your code, but we're trying to take a little bit of it out.
So I'm still looking for a motion from somebody if they're so inclined.
I'll move to recommend approval of the ordinance amendment to the village board.
Okay, motion by Joe Zotzelberger,
Second.
second by Brian Malich. Any other comments? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor, say.
I do have one comment. Once we're done with this, are we gonna get a copy of the new, it's like take section 130, whatever it is here, 1333, or 133? So let's see what the full ordinance, I know we've had it before, but.
So, well, the 133 that is the full ordinance right there.
This is this complete sign ordinance, right?
No, I'm sorry. Here is the complete sign ordinance. What the process that's going to happen here is that there's a public hearing before the village board. If the village board approves it, then the ordinance will be updated. I guess are you asking for like a red line version
Sometimes
of?
I get Asami and I need to read the ordinance.
Well, this
Start with-
you can have, depending on how many notes I haven't scribbled on this, you can have mine.
Okay, I'm good.
You're good? Okay, then I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, then we're gonna go back up to presentation. Are you leaving, Brian, then?
I was going to stick around for a little while if that's okay, but I do have to.
No, fine. We're all good. All right, we're gonna go up to presentations. Waunakee Housing Task Force presentation of findings.
How is everyone tonight?
Very good.
All right, so, yeah, good, thank you. So you have in your packet, and I'll be, pardon? Oh, I'm Kristen Runge. I am the facilitator for the Waunakee Housing Task Force, and we have our task force members here in the audience, or quite a few of them. If you don't mind, could I have them stand up, please, so everyone knows who has worked on it?
Sure.
I'm embarrassing you guys and didn't let you know I was going to do this. They've put in a tremendous amount of work over the course of this past year. Thank you very much for doing that. I appreciate it. And the amount of work that this group put in, as I said, was tremendous. Over the course of the last 11 months since we've had our first meeting, we have had a total of 8 speakers from the University of Wisconsin-Madison come out and present, 2 from the community who are experts in housing from the Madison area, experts in housing. The amount of material that this group has poured over would be daunting even for urban planning, masters, and PhD students. All of it was Waunakee specific data that they looked over. So the recommendations that they are making tonight are couched in that data. And along with that data, there is a really solid set of values that they arrived at as a group that are important for the decisions that they have made. And I'll reference those in a second. But the key issues that the group looked over this last year, among the many issues they looked over, are outlined in the report. And the top three really are that, top four, we are situated, as we all know, from experience in a growing metropolitan area. And we're expected to add 20,000 households to Dane County that's not people, that's households at an average of 2.47 people per household between now and 2040 to the Dane County area. So the pressure that all of our communities in this region are feeling in housing is not likely to go away quickly. So that's the context of this. The second thing, when we look at Waunakee housing information specifically, we have a growing retiree population in Waunakee. And even though our proportion of residents that are retiring, which is consistent with the nation as a whole, is growing, the actual income when we adjust for inflation that retirees have today versus in 2017 versus 2000 is shrinking. So more retirees and less money in our retirees' pockets. We have a shrinking proportion of middle income households, which is defined as households earning between 80 and 100% of area median income in our portion of Dane County, in our village in particular. And we have a lack of workforce housing, or we believe we have a lack of workforce housing. We have an overall strong reliance on in-commuters to work within the village. Roughly 80% of the folks that work within the village commute from outside of the village right now. We have anecdotally some difficulty recruiting residents to work, Waunakee residents to work in jobs within the village. And that's for a variety of reasons, a mismatch of skills, a mismatch of career paths, just different folks living in the village as opposed to what we need in the workforce. Part of that is likely related to an undersupply of homes in the middle income range, so priced for those making 80 to 100% of area median income, and those making lower incomes, 50 to 79% of area median incomes, which would be jobs that pay good wages, $13, $14, $15, $20 an hour, but aren't necessarily jobs that are matched to the home prices and the rental prices in Waunakee right now. The upside of all of this is that in the commuter survey we had 247 responses, and our commuters, and I do these surveys all over the state, are compared to other communities, something we can be really proud of, are overwhelmingly in favor of Waunakee. They see it as a welcoming, attractive community with great schools. They seem to be very pleased with it. They're just consistently citing that there aren't homes in their price range in Waunakee, and so that is a barrier to living here. So that's the key issues, among many others that we identified over the course of the year, but really the foundation for the decisions that the task force made regarding the recommendations that we're presenting tonight. So with that, a couple of other points of information. When we adjust for inflation, median income in Waunakee in 2000, after adjusting for inflation, was $85,202. In 2017, which is the last year that we have data for according to the U.S. Census, it was $98,224. That number actually has gone up in the last 2 years. Our median income today is a little bit higher than that, and we'll see some updated numbers from the census relatively soon. Our median family income went from an inflation-adjusted $97,673 in 2000 to $123,310,000. There's a lot of good things that go with having a high median income in your community, but also one of the indications of the dip in middle-income households, the number we have in Waunakee, is perhaps because some families are getting priced out of, or some households are getting priced out of housing here in the community. So those are all kind of things that are hovering in the background of this. Our existing housing stock right now, and this is using the 2018 census, or not 2018 census, the 2018 assessments. Our median home value is right around $399,000 in the community. The HUD limit for a family of 4 earning between 80 and 100% of median income, the upper limit is $308,000. So we have a slight mismatch between what our median household price is and what a family making a median income can afford within the village. So all of these things are hovering in the back of our minds as the group was making their decisions. They did a resident survey back this spring in between March and early May that is still actually up and running right now. If anyone wants to go take it, you're free to do so. 56% of the residents surveyed said that they agreed that they're worried that homes in Waunakee are becoming too expensive. 67% disagreed with the statement that there are a sufficient number of housing options for people with lower incomes in Waunakee. And 48% disagreed that renters in general, young families starting out, senior citizens, or renters with families would find a sufficient number of housing options in the village. So if you've read the packet, this is all stuff that I've just repeated to you that you've already read, but I wanted to kind of lay the foundation for what the group is recommending. So with that, the group in making their decisions said that there were 3 large principles that were going to decide decisions. First of all, housing should accommodate workforce needs was principle number 1. A second principle was those who work in the village should be able to live in the village if they choose. And third, that the housing strategies that they would recommend should address the needs of those who are currently underserved in the community. So they were really looking at making recommendations that served the community of Waunakee. And while we do recognize that there is an obligation to serve our larger Dane County community, the group that we're primarily focused on is those who live in Waunakee, although these strategies will allow other people to, hopefully partake in our community as well. They had 3 community concerns that they heard from representatives of the community. They heard or saw very clearly through the resident survey, heard from folks that they talked with. One is that we maintain the tax base within the village. The second community concern that guided decisions was that they maintain the quality of the schools through decisions for housing. And third, that they maintain the character of the community. This is not a recommendation to put up high rises or change the nature of the community in that way. So all of that is background. We had 12 recommendations that they arrived at. Would you like me to go through the recommendations? Yes? All right. No one needs a break at this point. Good. First one, and this is one of the most important recommendations that we made. Thank you. I should have put this as a PowerPoint presentation. There's 38 pages. There's a lot to go through here. I think we still have a few more. But the first recommendation is concerning our senior citizen population. The task force recommends that the senior housing is needed. We recognize this. They recognize this. These are their recommendations. That senior housing is needed. But the task force recommends that further study, specifically focus groups and other ways of investigating specifically what senior citizens want and what type of help they need with housing, whether that is apartments or assistance living in their current home, whatever that is. We need to explore that a little bit further before making a concrete recommendation. So although there is no concrete recommendation in terms of what should be built or done or designed for seniors, I want this to be understood. I think we as a group want this to be understood that this is a very important population to the group. Second, it's recommended that 160 housing units priced to target households making 80 to 100% of area median income be constructed within the next 5 years. This will fill a portion of the gap for middle income housing. This number was arrived at by looking at the available data for how many housing units we would need to build from a homeownership perspective, and fitting that number with the typical number of homes that we're building every year in Waunakee, and checking that against what the school district and the village has planned for in terms of increasing, so that we're not placing an undue burden on expanding the community. So this was designed to fit together with the existing plan. Recommendation number 3, it's recommended that 75 income-qualified rental units be constructed within the next 5 years and incorporated into mixed-income development. That is, from what we understand from Kurt Paulson and Tom Landgraf, who came to speak with us, a financially more feasible way of building housing that's income-targeted for renters and results in some really beautiful developments in Middleton that we got to see some pictures of. Recommendation number 4, it's recommended that the village work with developers and/or lenders to pursue a variety of housing loans and credits, including TIF financing, low-income housing tax credit, and assistance from the Federal Home Loan Bank. Recommendation 5, it's recommended that the village take up an offer to have the University of Wisconsin MBA real estate students come out and do some work for no charge to identify and assess sites for workforce housing within the village limits. That would provide some context for decisions that might be made down the road. Number 6, it's recommended, we were asked specifically to weigh in on the 75-25 rule that is outlined in 133-16. And if you read the report, there's a whole rationale for not rewriting that within the Housing Task Force and making a recommendation, specifically that the wording and the implications of rewriting that are far-ranging and beyond the scope of this particular task force, although they do outline some issues that they see within that, but they recommend that that be rewritten in the future and clarified. Recommendation 7, it's recommended that the village work to identify land and developers for smaller development projects, like incremental development options that are at neighborhood scale, such as fourplex and small multi-unit or multi-family units. Recommendation 8, it's recommended that the village work with developers to build small-scale real estate ownership projects like co-housing, cooperative, and neighborhood-scale units. Again, this is designed to provide some recommendations for options that are a little bit different than what we have. Recommendation 9, it's recommended that the village require a range of housing affordability options in the same development so that developments are mixed income with a range of housing types in development. Recommendation 10, it's recommended that the village create an index or a catalog of publicly available programs designed to provide assistance to homeowners and homebuyers. And with this recommendation and recommendation 11, that the village hold periodic seminars and outreach to provide first-time homebuyers with guidance and increase awareness of publicly available programs. We recognize, the group recognizes that half of the plan is to provide housing, make housing available. The other half is really to empower potential homeowners as in terms of how they would become homeowners or be able to purchase units. And finally, recommendation 12, the work of this committee was really wide-ranging, and there is a tremendous amount of knowledge and thought that's held within this particular group. So it's recommended that the village develop an ongoing committee that includes Plan Commission members and Housing Task Force members to continue addressing long-term affordable homeowner ownership and rental options within the village. So thank you for your time. That was a really long talk I just gave.
Not at all. Do any of the commission members have any questions for Kristen right away? Or comments?
I don't know if it's referenced in here, I don't remember seeing anything, but as far as the existing allotment of I guess, units today, anything that's under construction, I assume was not considered?
We used for homes that are owned, so any unit, be it multifamily or single family, that was owned and was on the tax assessment rolls in 2018, it was included. The apartments, specifically the units that are going up downtown, were not included, but those are also market rate apartments. So while they are affordable to renters within a certain range, they're not necessarily affordable to others that might be
It may just
in the
change some
target.
of our
It will.
ratios and things. So.
Yes, it will. Yeah. Other questions?
So I'll just say for the task force members that are here, thank you very much for your input. It wasn't necessarily an easy project to go through for us as a group. Everybody handled themselves professionally and worked together to come to these conclusions. There was no serious fighting that went on or any discourse that we had to go through, but it was an excellent exercise with great suggestions and collaboration to come up with these recommendations. Thank you to Kristen as well for facilitating and getting us through this. Now we're taking this from here up to the village board, is that correct, Kevin?
I think it's up to the planning commission, what you wanna do next.
I believe it needs to go up to the board personally, I mean,
In particular with recommendation number 12, I think that's something that ultimately the board needs to be involved with. Which leads to another question. Do you have any sort of a feel for what that might look like, other than that makeup of it?
We could probably come up with a model if the group was asked, but we left that up to the plan commission. Yeah.
I guess I would question, what are we exactly sending to the board, though? These are recommendations, but does some plan need to be discussed and brought together, or is that something that would be handled at the village board level?
so I guess I would say we should look at each of the recommendations, and does that make sense going to the board? And is the plan commission in agreement with the group that just went through this whole process for these recommendations? That's generally how we went through these at the committee level, subcommittee level, or task force level, however you want to call it. I think Kristen kind of highlighted all of them, why the recommendations are there. I don't think the task force would have recommended them if they weren't something that was definitely, you're seeing a little snapshot of the whole process that we went through. There was many, as Kristen pointed out, presentations and a lot of information provided to us as we went through. I think all 12 are valid and good recommendations to the board to consider. My opinion.
And I would second that opinion. I sat through a couple of meetings and saw the work and dedication. See the guest speakers that came in. You know, they're very educated and informed folks. So it was a fortunate exercise for us as board to be able to look through this and see the snapshot. It's a great template for moving forward.
Did that answer your question, Brian?
Well, kinda, I guess my question more so is, okay, so I think there's awesome information here, and my question is if this goes to, we say, okay, we're gonna send this to the board, and, you know, just pick a recommendation. Recommendation 8 is it is recommended that the village work with developers to build small-scale real estate ownership projects, co-housing, cooperative, and neighborhood scale units. What's the board gonna do with that? Does there need to be some sort of plan, you know, more discussion on a plan of how that gets implemented and put into play? Because just sending this to the board the way it is, I don't see where there's an actionable item on there.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And maybe I'm seeing it wrong, but I think these recommendations are great, but how do we create some sort of plan to move it forward? And I don't know that is done here. I don't know where that's done and what level that's done, but that's why I'm asking the question.
Jason, do you have a comment? You look like you were.
Sure. You have a report in front of you, and I would agree, this isn't a plan per se. There are some recommendations here, but to create you could adopt it as is, as a plan, and say, we are making these our plan. You could also choose to do some more, very short form kind of strategic plan that goes to which this is appendix that says, these are the things we're going to do, including addressing what you're going to do with the current ordinance policy, which was kind of kicked down the road in the report.
In follow up to that, as an example, I would say, okay, you go right away to recommendation 12, and how do you create a committee that moves forward? That committee could be tasked with creating some sort of plan, as an example,
Yeah, I think that
to
in the
address
spirit
these
of what this was,
recommendations.
Brian, the group came up with the recommendations for us. If you look at recommendations 2 and 3, they were more specific for what our targets are, or what they're recommending based on what all the information included. And then other things that are gonna be supportive of those is kind of how this flowed as far as I was reading it.
Okay. The question I would have is the village is gonna have difficulty saying that we need to put 160 households in this category. Because it's not it's gonna go to the developers and everybody else on what kind of development, mixed use, whatever that is, there has to be a conversation back and forth to create that. And it's not just to say, hey, we're gonna say that you have to have 160 units of this. That's gonna be difficult to do.
So again, it's recommended that that we put these numbers out there. If you look at the 160 housing units, if we looked at our average that we've had over the past 10 or so years, of around 90, 85, right in there, you'll look at it, it's actually about 40% of the total
Of the
housing,
total,
that's gonna be built. Follow that?
falls in the 80 to 100% of median income.
Correct.
Is that accurate?
Of what we've built, and I think our upper limit was 100 and, was that guideline about 120? Yeah. So this was the cushion between what we've been building and what we could build.
Does that make sense?
I struggle to believe that we have 160 units have been built in that 80 to 100,
No, we haven't.
No, we
That's-
have, yeah.
That's the goal moving forward.
Yeah.
that there's capacity to do that.
Correct.
Okay. But if there's capacity, it still becomes, how's that gonna get implemented? Where are we gonna put them?
And I think that's gonna be what the board's gonna have to make a decision on.
And that's why I'm asking,
where we fall at.
this goes to the board for that decision, or does it get decided at a different level or debated at a different level to be brought to the board?
Kevin, you're looking quiet over there.
There's some budget impacts with many of these recommendations, so you're gonna need some board support, and there's you gotta, how are you gonna carry out these recommendations? I mean, you're gonna have to put together some implementation plans in terms of how you're gonna hit this 160 over the next 5 years. We haven't touched on, like Jason said, the percentage of multifamily compared to our housing stock. What's the impact of these recommendations on that ordinance? I think we should send it, sitting here and listen to Jason and others, it should get kicked up to the board. And thinking that they're gonna have to pick and choose which ones become priority by budget and implementation in some of these recommendations, which ones are the higher priorities, which ones should we be working on in terms of trying to implement over the next couple of years.
I would also suggest that your next two substantial residential developments are on your agenda tonight, and you have teams here representing them that you might ask what they think about these policies and the fit for that 80 to 100% within their developments.
Okay. Other comments from people? I will point to Kristen, I guess, on this one and say that I was fortunate that I was able to be out in Denver about, a month ago. And I just stopped into a realtor shop. I know you're on vacation, stopping into realtor shops. Most people aren't doing that. I'm not looking to move. Maybe some people want me to, but I'm not looking to move. But I was trying to get a feel because Boulder, Colorado, and Madison are very similar in college campuses and their surrounding markets. And so I just said to the realtor, give me some background on the communities that are around Boulder. Because I was trying to figure out where Waunakee is and how we may be relatable to that. And the village of Greenwood Village was by far the most expensive in that area. The first condominium, there's no real apartments there, was $250,000 for a one-bedroom condominium. Okay, most of the housing was well into the $700,000 range. And so I said, why is that they're so much more expensive? And they said, it's very simple. They have the #1 school district in the area. Okay? And their proximity to us is very simple to get to Boulder, in and out for people to work there. I said, okay. I said, then flip it and say, what's your least expensive zone? And why is that? Well, that's in the areas that the schools aren't so great. It's a little older area. A lot of people, a lot of things moving in there. That's going to be it. And then Boulder was its whole separate issue. Boulder doesn't allow any new housing to be built at this time. So I found all that interesting, how the dynamics of the different communities there and what they're all trying to do and what they're trying to accommodate. Now, can you imagine what the Boulder pricing is like? They're not allowing any new houses to be built right in their community. So I've been trying to look outside of just what our housing study was, our housing task force was tasked with, and these are the kinds of things that you'll see not just here, but out in various parts of the country. And I think that we're going to continue as Dane County specifically, to battle this issue that we're going through right now. I just saw that over half of the communities in the state, mostly rural, are decreasing population. Where your population centers are all increasing. And Madison, of course, is one of those that's definitely increasing, Madison Market. So, our recommendations were provided to go to the board, and the board's gonna probably have to make some decisions on which, as Kevin pointed out, that we're gonna take up. But it's not limited to just Waunakee, any housing issues that are out there. I think we're gonna work hard to find that happy medium. That's our goal, for people that Waunakee's open to everybody, a friendly community. As you said, people made comments in regards to
Yeah.
Waunakee being a great place to come to visit, see all the things that we have, but maybe we're just not quite affordable for some of those folks. And how do we get that area that we can get there?
Yeah, and
So,
those are people who work here and contribute to the community already. Would love to live here too. Yeah.
So that is, my recommendation is to move this forward and like I said, we're gonna take this up at the board and, look seriously at how we can accomplish what's on these recommendations. If everybody will hear, okay, here. Brian, you're the one that's got the most comments, so I mean,
Well,
I'm looking for you to-
here's where I would say, and I don't know if this is an appropriate recommendation or not, but I would say, I would recommend moving this forward to the board with strong consideration to recommendation 12 and how we develop a committee and/or plan to move these recommendations forward.
That was a huge one at the task force, was having that. And forming a committee, and we wanted plan commission members, we wanted some of the members, I don't know if we looked at some of the task force members, I think,
Yeah.
is that we were putting onto here, those that were interested in doing it and putting in more. Probably a similar size committee to this, where you'd have 7, probably 2 of our plan commission members on there, so.
Because my position at this point is these are recommendations, how are we gonna implement them? That's really what it comes down to, and I don't think just forwarding this onto the board is enough. We need to figure out a plan to move it forward, to continue to move it forward, have the conversation, and how you implement it.
Right.
Whatever that might look like, but, obviously that's not gonna be decided here tonight, but we have recommendations of what that might look like.
So you'd like to see just some, I'm paraphrasing or following up with what you're saying. You would like to have this commission come up with that for the board, or forward this to the board for the board?
I think at this point, we forward it down to the board with these recommendations, with the note that the board discuss how we're going to move this forward, how we're gonna implement these recommendations, and whether that gets kicked back at this level or some other level, or a committee that's made up of the task force members and this plan commission is for the board to decide.
Okay,
Is that fair enough?
yeah. Clear? Everybody clear with that? Everybody good with that?
Yep.
Brian?
Yeah. I wrestle with the same, just, okay, what do we do with this, and what is our role in some of these recommendations? I don't think the village is gonna be building houses. I don't think we're getting into that line of work.
No.
So what does it look like to have this discussion with, like was mentioned, maybe some people sitting in the audience? So,
Okay.
let it vet out, I guess.
Do you have any comments to that, being our expert in this? Hearing
It's,
from here?
yeah, it starts with a conversation. So it starts with the intent to do something, and then everything follows from that. There is, as with any major shift in direction or adoption of a recommendation at the local level, a lot of work that needs to be done in the implementation and the figuring out. So yeah, I completely acknowledge that. I think the group would completely acknowledge that too. The group, those that are able and willing, are very interested in seeing this through and making those plans. So if we're concerned about the muscle behind the recommendations, I think we probably have a group of ready folks who have spent the last year intensively studying this. I'm not speaking for all task force members, so I don't want to put anything on everyone's calendar, but there are folks on the task force who are willing to move forward with these.
Okay. I don't think we have any other recommendations that we have to move this to the board, and we'll move forward from there. as Brian said, we'll try to have a plan that comes from the board, whether it's going down to this committee, whether it's coming to the plan commission first, to give to the subcommittee. We'll have to work through that, so. Kristen, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is our second public hearing item, public hearing and discussion action on general development plan and related zoning for Arboretum Village subdivision, corner of Quinn Drive and Hogan Road. Kevin?
We're recommending that you hold the public hearing tonight, but not take action. There's some comments out there regarding, or some staff comments that regarding the zoning and more particular, the final plat, which you want those to go hand in hand. You don't want to approve one without the other. That we did receive, we provided a number of staff comments, the developer, in fact, they've replied, but we haven't, in fact, I think some emails came in at 2 o'clock this morning, with revisions to the plans. But we need some time to go through those and make sure they're consistent with what our staff comments were. So at this point, I don't think there's gonna be substantial changes to the documents that are being provided. They're more technical in nature in terms of complying with some of the staff comments, the engineering issues, and some of the clarification on the zoning and the GDP. So we do think it's appropriate to hold the public hearing on what's been presented, and then we can be in a position to take action at the next meeting.
Are we doing any kind of presentation tonight?
I wasn't planning on it, but we certainly can ask the developer if he wants to make a presentation.
Would you like to make a presentation beforehand, before we open the public hearing? Assuming people may have questions based on what you state, that's why I'm opening that up.
If there's any questions, we'll be here.
Okay. Okay, then I'm gonna open up the public hearing, 6:47. For anybody who'd like to address the commission on this? I don't have any forms. Yes, ma'am. If you
I
could
just want- I
state
just-
your name and your address, please.
My name is Olivia Perry, and I'm a senior planner in the Dane County Planning and Development Department, and this is the area I work in for the county. I just want to really congratulate you guys on such a successful process. It was really, just hearing about it and watching it a little bit over the last year, you did a really best practices process, and this is a very difficult thing for communities to do, and I really just want to congratulate you on what you did. The point that I think Brian was making, and I think everybody understands, it's like, how do we move this forward? This is where communities get stuck. And the idea that you would want to put together a committee to, sort of be responsible for these recommendations is just a, sort of best practices. But yeah, mostly I just want to say congratulations, and it's really a job well done. I work with a lot of communities around the county, so.
Anything on the Quinn Drive project?
Pardon me?
Anything on the Quinn Drive project?
On the
All right. Anyone else as far as the Quinn Drive project? All right, then I'm gonna close the public hearing. I don't know that we have to really do anything this evening with this,
There is no action tonight.
since, unless commission members have questions for Kevin. I think it's gonna come back next meeting probably. Okay, will there be a public hearing again as well for that?
There will not. This will stand as the public hearing.
Okay. If we want to have a public hearing, can we have another public hearing? or
We
was that-
certainly can.
Okay, and how do we know, are we gonna make sure we take care of the noticing and process for making sure we have it? I'd like it to be posted for public hearing.
Yeah, as a reminder, public hearing is not required at the planning commission level.
Understood.
We do hold public hearings on final plats, and we do a class 1 notice. So if you're interested in having a public hearing on this issue, we certainly can add it and publish it accordingly. I don't expect any changes to the zoning documents. I think if there's any changes, they're gonna be the final plat, and there is not a public hearing on the final plat. The public hearing is really related to the general development plan, which is the zoning. But there are some additional documents that we'll include in the packet, so maybe it's worthwhile to have another public hearing. Certainly is not gonna hurt to provide the additional comments. We asked for a couple clarifications, Jason did in his memo, and they've been provided. So, some of those documents came in, late last week or early this morning, that we can provide to the public. So if they wanted to cipher through that and provide comments at the next public hearing, they certainly can do that. But nothing is intended to change the zoning documents. They're more clarification on what's been provided.
Okay. I'm in favor of us allowing to have a public hearing next time if people want us to make comments, simply because we'll have all the facts at that point as opposed to, is that doable?
Sure,
for you guys?
absolutely.
Everybody okay with that? Okay, all right. Moving on then. Under new business, discuss and take action on final plat and specific implementation plan for Arboretum Village subdivision, corner of Quinn Drive and Hogan Road.
As an introduction, I don't know if Don is interested in making a presentation, but the final plat is consistent with the preliminary plat, which was recommended approval by the Plan Commission and adopted by the village board. There were a number of conditions that were included in the preliminary plat. One of the biggest issue was the parks dedication. And the Parks Committee did meet and did adopt or accept what was being proposed by the developer in terms of the off-site park improvements that'd be part of this project. Again, we're working through some of the technical issues with stormwater, some street width, some utility issues, but they're not expected to change the plat in terms of the configuration of road layouts, or there may be some small adjustments in lot configurations, but nothing substantial that's going to change the lot count or the general layout of the final plat. So again, we're not asking you to take action tonight. We wanted to provide you an update on where we're at, and then we do expect to have our review of all the comments that were provided to the developer and their response. We expect to have the full report then available at the next Plan Commission meeting.
Any questions for our Plan Commissioners for Kevin at this point? No? Okay, then we'll move on. Next, we have our initial consultation on a proposal to develop the Breinig lands, Schumacher Road and State Highway 19.
No action tonight. They're just here tonight to give you some initial presentation on their proposed development. I did ask that Jason and Kent give you some initial comments that I think were included in the packet. And so we can discuss, you can give them some initial feedback on the development, or certainly you're not, if you want to like think through those after you hear this and report back, or have another meeting where you provide some more concrete suggestions, you can do that.
Okay.
So I'd turn it over to these guys.
If you could just give your name and who you're representing and all that
Absolutely,
fun.
yep.
All right, let's test this out, just to make sure we can control it.
There we go.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Sellers. I'm with Viridian Homes. With me tonight is Brian Munson, my planner with Van Wall, and Dan Day, my engineer from D'Onofrio, Waunakee and Associates. We're very excited to present tonight as we go through our proposed development on the Breinig property here. Building homes that enrich lives and realize dreams. This is a slogan that Viridian lives by, and again, we're very excited to get back into Waunakee. It's been a number of years since we've been able to build and develop here, and we finally identified the right time and place to do it, and that's what I'm going to present to you tonight. Just a few quick background about Viridian. We've won quite a few awards through the years. Some of the most prestigious ones are being named National Builder of the Year by Professional Builder Magazine a few years ago, as well as receiving Avid Gold ratings for our customer service. We subscribe to an Avid report that gives us a customer report surveys, and we average consistently over 97% every year to make sure that we build, not only take care of our customers, but build repeat buyers, because that's the true source of a lot of our business. The guiding principles, usually when I sat down with Kurt and Peggy, we talked about this, and I said usually I have about 3 guiding principles I used when doing a new development to figure out what we're going to do, but in this case we had a 4th, and this was really helpful for us. Kristen, we actually watched all the YouTube videos as well of all the meetings, so I sat and kind of watched the task force do their job, and it was, really the question was asked, what can the village do for developers? Well, this is what you've done. You've shown us who the customer base is and who the target demographics are. You've identified that for us. So now the ball's back in our court on how do we get there and how do we deliver to this consumer is what we're looking for. We start with housing variety. We integrate housing options in both format and price point. We build housing that supports the many needs of a community and will facilitate housing that meets residents' changing needs. So the goal is to create kind of a master plan community where we have all different price points within the same community, but you have what we like to call an economic diversity throughout the neighborhood, where you've got people at all different levels living together. What struck me most in that study is that almost 50% of the population in Waunakee earns between $50,000 and $150,000 a year, and there's no housing available to them. So that right there is our target demographic that we're really trying to cater to with this development. Second is vibrancy. We blend architectural diversity with people-friendly designs. We create and inherit a sense of community through a mix of uses and housing. Then we integrate a diverse parks, open space, and trails to support the entire community. We have very strict architectural review community standards within our developments to make sure that there's no redundancy throughout, that there's a lot of different and diverse housing product throughout the neighborhood. And I'd encourage anyone to go through any of our west side neighborhoods from Middleton to Verona and drive around, and you'll see what we're planning for this area. The last one is sustainability. We respect the natural features and heritage of the land. We use certified energy and efficient designs and environmentally sound practices. Obviously, this is a very beautiful property. We want to maintain the topography and aesthetics as much as we can, and we don't plan on disrupting too much of the natural beauty and scenery of it. The property, for those of you who don't know, right here is just a location map right next to our new library. And north of the business park, we identified that as a great amenity to a thriving business park, I should say. The total property acreage is 160 acres. And it is in the comprehensive plan for development. It's called out as community residential, and that's the basis of which we're trying to follow here. And then this is just a topography map. What's also interesting is that from the low point to the high point, you have a difference of almost 80 feet. So we really want to try to maintain that topography as best we can to create view corridors and maximize exposures for all of the houses, as well as have a central park that'll be the visible corridor for people driving into the village. So here's the plan. I'll give you a quick overview, and then Brian Munson will talk more about the product and what it looks like. We'll start here in the south end with just more density along Main Street, primarily multifamily or senior housing. We haven't figured that out quite yet, what would make the most sense there. And that rolls into this area right here, which is our carriage lane product for first-time home buyers, entry-level buyers. Again, our target price point there is just under $300,000. Based on what we know so far, we feel very confident we can get there with a product, potentially in the 270s to 260s starting point for a product in here. Then you move up into single family, more of a bigger lot, bigger house, front car garage, 2-car garage, up into our estate product, which are going to go on the high side of the property to maximize that view corridor for our move-up / luxury buyers. So again, the master plan concept in mind, you've got rental to first-time ownership to move up to luxury. That takes you all the way down back here to the purple area, which is a new demographic we've been building for, and that's our downsizer or active adult communities. The target population demographic there is 50 and older. We've identified that there's a lot of desire for this product for people whose kids have gone off to college. They still want a nice place to own. They only want to live there 6 months of the year or all year, but they don't want to worry about all of the nuances of owning a big house, including lawn mowing and snow removal, which we include in our HOA fees for these people that will live in these houses here. All full exterior maintenance throughout the year that nobody has to worry about. The last site here is just the beautiful barns that sit out there today where Mrs. Brining lives, and that's something that we've identified that we want to really take our time with. We don't want to do anything with that right away. We have all kinds of ideas, from anything from potentially a warship site to a mixed-use restaurant site similar to a Quivy's Grove, But we'd like to try and maintain the use of as many of the structures as we can because they've been so well maintained through the years, and it's something that's very prominent that everybody really recognizes when they drive into Waunakee coming off the highway. We've also identified the Welcome to Waunakee sign would be just pushed up and relocated to the high point up here. We absolutely want to maintain that so everybody knows where they're entering when they come in. Next up, I'll let Brian talk about the different product a little bit and show you what this actually looks like.
Thank you, Chris. Again, Brian Munson with Vanderwall Associates, and it's almost perfect timing. We didn't select this meeting, but happened to fall on it, and the discussion of a mixed income approach to housing really is what we've taken to municipalities throughout Wisconsin, especially on behalf of Viridian, and their focus on developing neighborhoods that serve the full life cycle of housing, so that you have opportunities to buy your first home. You can step up from rental within a neighborhood, get to like the community, find a place to buy that first house, potentially move up from there to luxury, and then long range, even potentially cycle back down to a downsizer home and never have to leave your neighborhood. Because we feel that neighborhoods should deliver upon housing regardless of what need you have, where you are in that life cycle. And so we've tried to design this property because of the unique opportunity from a size standpoint to accommodate all those different types of housing. The other aspect is that because Viridian is both a developer and builder in a project like this, it offers some unique opportunities to coordinate, both as Chris mentioned from the architectural standpoint, but also through the details of construction standpoint. We deliver the project from where it sits today all the way through to the keys, and so there's some unique opportunities that brings in oversight and implementation that is unique in cases like this. I'd also point out that every single picture you see in this slideshow has a location because these are all Viridian neighborhoods. These are formats of housing that we have been working on, Dan and I specifically working on projects going back more than 20 years that deliver upon these. So when we talk about implementation of mixed income neighborhoods, it comes from practice and experience. And so we want to really shine a light on that. And so as you go through this, you'll see examples from our neighborhoods of houses that would fit throughout this project. Just to kind of walk us through, as Chris did, from south to north, some of the first pieces you come off of the entrance would be opportunities for some multifamily or senior housing. Again, designed to fit the context of what's around it. So you see some opportunities to place it next to some of the open space components and some of the buffers along 19, but also designed to fit into the framework of the neighborhood and the community. We also have an opportunity to look at that town center for the farm mixed use piece as a unique aspect, of whether that becomes a Quivy's Grove format or something else. We see that as an asset because of the history of the use and the beauty of those structures, to find ways to see if we can repurpose those and integrate them into the project. But from there, we see the housing spanning many different formats. As Chris mentioned, the purple sections on the map are some twin homes, which would be owner occupied, could be accessed off of a carriage lane or from a street, but really are targeted opportunities to give some move down housing or some downsizer housing with some amenities to help support them. So a unique housing product that isn't really present much within Dane County, but something that we've been working into some of our neighborhoods, both in Sun Prairie and the west side of Madison. As I said, these can be front-loaded, they can be off an alley, but that ability to have some concierge services to support that user group is something that's unique, and that's reflected in that Haven series. Our single family spans a whole spectrum of price point and format, the first being our carriage lanes, where you have an alley or a traditional alley at the back, but that allows the architecture to really focus on that front door components. And this creates streetscapes, architecture, and a variety of different formats that allows us to diversify the price point while still offering home ownership opportunities within the neighborhood. These homes are very comparable to what you'd find in some of these street accessed homes, in that if you just look at the living space itself and then think about how much space we dedicate and how do we dedicate space for parking our cars, the actual home sizes of some of the alley product is identical to what can be fit on a much wider front load product, because you're not dealing with 24 feet worth of width to store a 2-car garage or more. So we often find that the living space is what you'll find on an alley is comparable to what you'd find across the street within some of the street access housing. Speaking of some of our street access housing, this will span an additional price point range that will be fairly significant in this project. We have both opportunities for kind of a slight move up or entry-level buyer all the way up through luxury, because this site has some fantastic views up at the top of the ridge and really gives an opportunity to incorporate a diversity of housing that will span and adapt as you move through this project and then transition to the surrounding area. These, again, will also be very carefully designed. Our focus being to recess the garages, pull the porches forward so that you have a streetscape that's focused on the house and not on the car, but is designed to fit into the framework of a variety of different housing types. We accent that with a lot of parks and open space. We've already had a chance to talk with Sue with the Parks Department about how some of these spaces could be activated and utilized. And so within the project, you'll find both small-scale greens that are supporting some of the higher density housing, but also a community park that's positioned at the top of the hill to take advantage of that viewscape. If you look closely at the graphic, you can see kind of a triangular view shed, and that's roughly the area which you would see the Capitol and the Isthmus from, which is visible on the horizon. We want to try to design to meet that opportunity and preserve it so that we have both a sense of place, not just within the neighborhood, but its tie out to the greater community. We also accent that with walking paths throughout. We're excited about the opportunity to have paths that will circulate along 19 Schumacher and then through the neighborhood to give our residents and community residents opportunities to walk around. We specifically designed to try to create some loops because we find people will utilize walking loops much more than kind of a there and back. And so we've tried to identify opportunities to extend trails throughout the project whenever we can and connect both destinations in use as well as parks and open space. The final piece of the neighborhood really is then that sustainability components. We've looked very closely, although at a preliminary stage, at the stormwater management and try to find ways so it's not an engineered rectangular pond, sorry Dan, but actually an amenity, an accent with amenities. So we have opportunities where we could have paths coupled up with stormwater. We might have benches and open space that would flow out of it. So we see the stormwater as both serving that function, ecological function, but also trying to design it in a way that becomes an amenity to not just our neighborhood, but the surrounding. So tonight, again, we're excited to be here. This is a complex project. It's going to take multiple steps to get there. But we really do appreciate any feedback that you might have so that we can go back and refine. Because, again, we're at the concept stage. We're trying to integrate a variety of different housing within this project, but we're excited about the possibilities that it brings both to the Waunakee community as well as Viridian's interest in really creating communities and neighborhoods that fit and advance the growth of the community. So we're excited about this location, its proximity to jobs. We're excited about the opportunity to have diverse housing within this project. And so again, tonight we welcome any and all comments that you might have so that we can continue on that path of design.
Perfect, thank you. Plan Commission members, questions? We have a resident that has a question, so I'll, go ahead, just say your name. and address.
Nyla Fry, 404 East Burling Avenue. I think it's great that you have given a lot of consideration to the existing housing development that's there, as well as Water Tower Park. And I see that you have walking paths, accessibility. And one thing that I don't see, but I know it's not a comprehensive plan, is access to parking for the parks. And that's very important because if you don't have access to a park, it can't be used. So just want to put that in there.
Thank you. And we are in conversation with the Parks Department about kind of the next steps of the parks design. This is really kind of a placeholder. We were interested in getting feedback about how the community would like to see, especially that community park in the center, utilized. And if that means parking to make that accessible, that's something that we can explore. But we also anticipate things like how can we get active recreation uses into that park, shelters, additional walking paths. So we just haven't quite gotten to that stage.
Thank you.
Yep.
One sec. Any commission members have any questions right now?
I got two.
Joe?
First one would be, with any recent developments, it seems that the Postal Service is having mailboxes grouped. How does that fit into here?
Oh yes, our favorite CBUs.
I'll answer that just because it's a full-time job for somebody right now in our company. And, I think we know better than anybody how to deal with it, but it's very difficult because you have to first identify who the Postmaster General is for the area, and then you build a relationship with them to in advance, mark where all of these CBUs or the mailboxes, we prefer to put them in locations that, again, is easily accessible for people living in proximity to those. Some municipalities are okay with taking them on in open spaces as long as we then have our HOA maintain the areas around them, and that typically is what works best, because then you can put them in more open spaces rather than trying to cram them in people's side yards or front yards even, which is really a deterrent. So it's a very detailed, ever-evolving process, but it's something we're familiar with, and we'll just have to kind of work through as we get through the design here.
Do you foresee that being, I guess, multiple places then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Versus a single large.
Right, in other states, I've been to other states, and they'll have a single large gathering area. It's something that is just not, it wasn't well received here, nor the way we phase build our way in. Keep in mind, this whole thing isn't gonna pop up in 1 year. It's gonna be. Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna take a number of years, and so that's where we really just kind of place these as we get out into each phase individually.
And then the second question I had, it seems like all of the parks are on the left and, what I guess that would be west and, but there's kind of that lack in the upper corner. Is there a reason behind that, or?
Well, as we look at placement and design of parks, we look at, like housing, parks serve different needs based upon what's around it.
Yep.
So within the southern areas, we kind of have 2 small pocket parks. These have been very successfully received in a number of different neighborhoods where they're scaled to be appropriate to the single-family environment around it. And we've got parks where, we might find 20 kids in the park and no adults because they're on the porches across the street.
Yep.
So we see these, potentially being maintained by the HOA, but serving as kind of an open space to serve the density around it. This park right here, we anticipate being kind of our most utilized park, where you could see active recreation incorporated it in. That is offset against some of the lower density housing here. So if you think about a yard space, the differential between the carriage lanes and the front access housing is, the front access housing kind of has that traditional backyard. You have a little more opportunity for the small play structure on your lot, whereas these houses really look to these open spaces as being destination for some of that use. We see this serving a large portion of this. Again, it's a block walk to most of the houses. We're also looking at an opportunity here for an addition to Water Tower Park potentially, where we could have some additional open space that could serve it. And we've heard comments about, can we get that opened up with a trail access or things into the neighborhood? So we're exploring all of those.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Phasing. Can you talk about the phasing
Sure.
a little bit?
So, again, we typically like to phase uphill, water runs downhill. So we want to start, what we'd be looking at is a phase potentially coming in this zone, which would allow us to bring online a variety of different housing. So the design is intentional to give both carriage lane, street access, twin homes, multifamily, a variety of different things to get the project going and offer diversity of housing right out of the gate. From there, we could also have some components that could capture some of that upper end housing. Again, building in different markets. We like to try to diversify what we deliver on a phase-by-phase process. After that, it really comes down to trying to accommodate what the market's looking for. So we'll be able to branch out and deliver additional block segments. As Chris mentioned, this will be a multi-year, multi-phase build-out. And we take into account utility looping, traffic distribution, and access to different product types, different price points, and then just how do we grade all and construct all of this to make sure that it fits seamlessly into the neighborhood. But our first steps would likely be in this area and then kind of branch out from there.
Over how many years do you think? I'm just looking at your numbers with the other housing, and I'm looking at what our stock would be out there.
Yeah, and again, there's, the market's always cyclical, but the plan is 8 to 10.
Okay. Mary Ellen?
I just want to make a comment that that's well situated to take advantage of all the things that the Schumacher Farm County Park offers. So if you're concerned about park space not being as much on the right-hand side, you're right there next to Schumacher Farm, and that's just such a wonderful, wild area, and now the Center for Rural History. So that's a great asset to that.
Absolutely agree. In fact, we've designed the trail point to try to come all the way through the project, from Division Street across and over, and try to open up Schumacher to folks that might want to walk there as well.
I do every day.
There you go.
Speaking of trails, I don't see anything connecting like to get across, for example, at Division or, for that matter, I guess, Ramus Road to get into the south side.
Yes, and we are meeting with the DOT. We're trying to get that coordinated here in the next couple of weeks to talk about all of those intersections, because we don't show them yet, but we do anticipate, of course, you've got Village Park here and a need to get north-south, looking to see what options are here, but then also looking at what options are at Ramish. And so as we anticipate build out of those street frontages, we'd be looking at how all those connections work.
Because
to both
there's
move
several
everyone.
path connections in the south side and how to make that.
Yep, yeah, this path right here on the south, we'd love to see that have penetrations up to the north as well.
And then one of the comments I saw in some information was Division Street extension.
Sure. Dan, you want to talk Division Street? Sure.
So we've looked at Division Street here, which is the connection, which would bring Division Street from Main Street all the way up to Easy Street and north, and have looked at that a little bit here. And, you know, staff has been very straightforward with us from the start that they'd like to see that connection made. But I guess there's several reasons why we haven't included it on our version of the concept at this point in time. And that's because of several things, and I'll just kind of run through these quick, and then we want to get some feedback. Obviously, that's what we're here for, so that we would know where to go next. So just a quarter mile east of the site, west of the site, excuse me, you've got Madison that runs all the way north and south, and then right on our east side, you got Schumacher, which obviously goes all the way north and south. So that was one component of why that hasn't been included. Second was that Division Street, you know, when we looked at the comp plan, isn't shown on the comp plan as a connection like a couple of the other connections are shown, and it's not shown on there also. The other thing that I think needs to be considered, and one thing that we've been really kind of brainstorming about, I'm sorry, Brian, good to see you behind me there, is that the park, we really think, has some opportunities here that if you run a roadway through the middle of it, that would be eliminated potentially. So I think some thought needs to be put into not just that connection to Division, does that make sense from a community connection, from a vehicular standpoint, but what can we do potentially with not doing that? What could we do in this zone of maybe making this a little bit more of an active park of, you know, maybe a dog park with a small parking lot coming off the north end, connecting to the current sledding hill there also. The other thing is, you know, as you can see by our neighborhood plan, really doesn't provide anything for this neighborhood to be able to make that connection. And then last but not least is with that connection going straight due north and south, there'd be considerable tree line through there that provides buffer to the lands to the west that would have to be removed to be able to make that happen. So those are the factors as to why we haven't included it on the plan at this point in time. But again, like I said, staff's been very straightforward, and every time we talk to them that they'd like to see that happen. So I guess we were looking for some feedback from you folks tonight as to what your thoughts are. We obviously know that's going to be a point of discussion. Questions?
I guess my only comment with that is when we had our tech staff meeting and I was present, that particular park, I just wondered, how do people get to it? Because of the way it's laid out. It's not shown right really on here how people are gonna access it. I'm assuming people aren't gonna wanna be cutting through people's house yards to get to the park. So that's something that would have to address. As far as the road going through, I guess I'm gonna defer to staff on their recommendation on that as far as, we're gonna get two different looks. If you have a road going through as opposed to blending it all together up there. But again, how do we get access to it? And maybe that's to the parking question that went up. Maybe one of the lots could be used for parking or something, or some sort of right of way in there.
Yeah, a couple things that we've talked about is you've got, of course, Division from the north, the stub here is the opportunity to bring some parking access from there. Currently for the sledding hill, if you think about it, people kind of park up here at Verleen and Division, then walk in. We've also, as we look at this section, you know, there are opportunities potentially. One of the things we were intrigued by was the opportunity to potentially get this park linked up to this park. And we don't know yet whether that's come down and come behind or kind of a mid-block. We're exploring different opportunities. There's quite a bit of grade cut right here. This was designed to try to preserve that tree line that's on the ridge. And so that tree line is in the park section, but we'd have to look to see, can we get through this direction from a grade sense? What would the impacts be on that tree line? Or do we have to come from this section or from this section? So we're looking at those details to see about opening that up. Again, I think the challenge or the question, the policy question to the city being the benefits of one park versus, you know, kind of divided by the street. There's a lot of grade that could have to be made up, but again, those are things that we've heard clearly, but we wanted to get feedback on as to some directions so that we know which way to head.
I guess from my position, a connection on Division Street may help alleviate some congestion on Madison in front of the schools and stuff trying to get out. You know, if you have another alternate access to get to Highway 19 from that north part of the town. And the reality of it is, if it isn't done now, it's never gonna get done. So,
We recognize that.
How does Public Works feel about alley-loaded lots for snow plows? Is that HOA plowed, or how do those alleys get plowed?
Initial discussions would be that the alleys would be privately maintained. We have examples, actually privately owned and maintained. We have examples both ways. The City of Madison wanted them as public. We got projects where they were the first public alleys in 80 years. In Sun Prairie, they were done as private, where the HOA then plows. We've also gone through every iteration of garbage pickup, snow removal, utility installation that you could possibly mix. But our understanding at this stage is they would be private alleys and privately maintained.
so when you talk about a HOA, are you referring to every one of these properties that would be on an alley or have an alley in the back? They would be all in the same HOA, or how would that be handled?
We would see the entire project as being part of the HOA, in that there will be spaces beyond the alleys, whether that's planting islands or pocket parks or trails and benches, where the HOA may have maintenance responsibilities that serve the entire neighborhood.
And when would that be implemented? At what point in the project? When you look at the project in its entirety, at what point would that be?
The
turned
HOA,
over?
setting up the HOA, right up front.
Day one.
Day one, yes. We record the CCRs against all of the properties, set up the HOA as part of that kind of first step before the first closing, so that, you know, everybody has a manual and a set of expectations and an understanding of how voting allocations, fees, all those things are calculated, just so that we avoid some of those headaches down the line.
Also, Brian, there's a company a sister company of Viridian that takes care of the management of the HOA. So that's implemented right from the start also. So it's also got professional management as it goes along through the process.
Anything else? How about the Brian, are you happy with what you're seeing? This is your family property. I want you to be all in this kind of mode before we would.
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
Right from the start. They've been excellent to work with. This is the plan that they showed us right from the start, and very, very pleased.
Okay, I don't think we have any action tonight. We're just, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing the rest as it comes along here. Okay, August meeting's canceled, so we don't have anything Westport Waunakee. Great. We just need one more motion.
Move to adjourn.
Motion by Joe Zisselberger to adjourn.
Second.
Second by Chris Thomas. He was first. Call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.